Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual candidate forum. We're very excited to have so many of the candidates here this evening, and we look forward to hearing your views regarding the disability community, developmental disability community. For those that I haven't met, my name is Heather Denman. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of Harrisonburg and Rockingham County. And we are the primary host and moderator for this evening's event. Warren McKean from the ARC of Augusta sends his regrets this evening. Unfortunately, he cannot be here due to some family issues. So just want to say that as a reminder for both the candidates and the members of the audience, the ARC, both of Augusta and Harrisonburg and Rockingham County, and all chapters of the ARC of Virginia are nonpartisan 501c3 organizations. We do not endorse political parties or candidates. We just want the opportunity to have a forum so that you can hear their views and what they will do for the developmental disability community. Tonight's event is not a debate, but it's an opportunity for the candidates to introduce themselves, share their personal ideas about and responses to questions that are really important to us as a community.
Redistricting and saying that they're going to have to do another election. So he said this one, and then, but he may not do it. I don't know.
I'm sorry, could you, can we mute everybody?
Yes, I just.
Okay, we ask that candidates keep their responses appropriately tailored to the questions and topics at hand and be respectful of all in attendance. Audience members are encouraged after the forum to reach out to the campaigns directly with any additional questions on the topics. Now we will give the candidates joining us tonight the opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and offer a little bit about their background. Since we're fortunate to have so many candidates, we will be asking everyone to keep their introductory remarks as brief as possible. And we will take them alphabetically by district, starting with the 20th district. So that means you, John Avoli. Well, and I think you're on mute.
Commentary to the ARC. Thank you for hosting this forum, and look forward to it as I did 2 years ago. I know we have a short period, so I'll go very quickly. Background. I'm a graduate of the University of Richmond, University of Virginia. I began my career as a teacher and coach. Then I became an assistant principal at the Valley Vocational Technical Center, then a high school principal at Sturstraft High School. And from there, went back to Valley Votech as the director of the center, and ended my career as the executive director of the Frontier Culture Museum. In the midst of all this stuff, in 1990, I ran for Stanton City Council, was elected. Served for 16 years there, and 14 of those years as the mayor. So I'm very proud of what we did in the city of Stanton with a collaborative effort, so many things. But I want to highlight this right now, specifically in my background with dealing with people with disabilities. In 1979, I was appointed assistant principal of the Valley Votech Center, in charge of and to create and implement what was called the Employment Training Program. And the Employment Training Program was a pre-vocational education program. Back then, we called Disadvantaged and Handicap. I had kids there, 300 of them, from Stanton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County, starting in the 8th grade, where we taught pre-vocational skills. And hopefully at some time, they would matriculate into the regular program of Valley Votech Center, or ultimately into Woodrow Wilson Rehabilitation Center. At that point, I met Judy Sorrells, who was the regional director of the Special Services, and my favorite teacher of all time, and I do believe that she was a board member at ARC in Waynesboro, Tammy Johnston, as we began to improve and begin the implementation of program as we call them today, what they are. Then I went to Sturstrath High School, and the program followed me. Back in, it was called the profoundly handicapped students, as well as emotionally disturbed kids. I truly enjoyed working with those kids my entire time. I've never forgotten. That's why I'm a huge supporter of early childhood education, as I was in a General Assembly, because I do believe that getting kids at an early age, a very early age, is paramount, because if not, once you get them to the high school, it's difficult to deal with the problematic issues they bring with you. So that's a little bit of background, who I am, and my background in dealing with people with disabilities, as well as my experience as mayor of the city of Stanton. For the last 2 years, I've been in the General Assembly, and I'm proud to serve on Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee, which ARC is part of, also transportation, and my love of life is public education, the Education Committee, K through 12. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. Randall Wolf, please tell us.
Thank you, Heather.
Oh, hi, welcome.
Hi. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this. And for me, as a lifelong journalist, I grew up in suburban Philadelphia, worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Baltimore Sun, and finished my career at the News Leader as an editor. Currently, after that, I started a nonprofit myself with help, Bike Box of the Blue Ridge, where we bring in donated bikes and fix them up and get them back to the community at low or no cost. And so for me, as a bike advocate, I have been working with a number of people to help build and focus on building better communities to empower human locomotion. And that spans a lot of things, right? It's walking, biking, it's people with disabilities in wheelchairs. So that's what I've been most involved in recently, as I run for office in the 20th. And I'm here as much to learn and listen as I am to really tell you what I think needs to be done. This is not something I consider myself an expert in, but as a journalist all my life, I've spent time listening, and my goal is to empower people, all people, and give them real opportunity and access to things. Transparency is very important to me. So as far as I think COVID has forced us to learn how effective a meeting like this is and how empowering that can be. So all public meetings, I think, in the state of Virginia should be virtually broadcast so people can be part of them at their homes. That includes public comment and includes live transcription for people that are deaf. So it's things like that that I'm a little bit focused on, but like I say, I've got a lot more to learn than I can be a teacher on this. So I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. From the 24th district, how about you, Sam?
Thank you very much, Heather, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sam Soger. I live in Amherst, and I'm seeking seeking office for the 24th district. And I've never run for office before. It was actually grandmothers in my community that asked me to step up. And when those grandmas asked me, there was no way I was going to say no. I'm already somebody who has dedicated a life to service. I've always been involved in volunteerism. And so when I became a parent and got involved as a parent in the school system, I found myself attending all of the school meetings and getting in touch. And I'm now one of the members of the superintendent's community advocacy committee, trying to make sure that we can get broadband for all the students in our district, which is sorely lacking and very important. So I was always also calling the Board of Supervisors and talking to them about how they should be appropriating these funds that have come from the federal government that unfortunately in my county of Amherst, those funds are really not going towards healthcare to address the crisis we're in right now with COVID. And so I will continue to be working on that, either in Richmond or just here as a citizen in the county. So I worked in theater and film for most of my life, and since I'm a kid, but I've also really been involved in, like I said, volunteering, and I want to stand up for the most marginalized people in our society, because I truly believe if we're going to succeed all together as a society, we have to make sure that everyone has all of the tools that they need to succeed. So if I were to go to Richmond, I would definitely focus on that, making sure that the most marginalized in our society get lifted up, because if we're going to all succeed, we need everyone in our society to be succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. 25th District, let's hear from Jennifer Kitchen.
Hello, thank you, Heather. My name is Jennifer Kitchen, and I'm running to represent the 25th District in the House of Delegates. I am a lifelong rural Virginian, mother of 2 kids, ages 11 and 13, and I navigate life with the chronic pain condition fibromyalgia. I am a cancer survivor, I am a brain aneurysm survivor, and I am both a member of and an advocate for the disability community. In December of 2019, right after my first campaign for this seat, I went to work for the Arc of Augusta as a program assistant. The reason I decided to enter this field is because I truly believe that the only way long-lasting solutions can be found to so many of the issues our disability community faces is for more of our legislators to have hands-on knowledge that can only come from working in the field. Some of the issues that I am running on are rural broadband access. People need to be able to participate in the world around them. Able-bodied people got just a taste of what it's like to be isolated through the pandemic. And while I am glad it has forced us to discuss just how necessary internet connection is, I also find it endlessly frustrating that it took able-bodied people being uncomfortable and inconvenienced for it to be prioritized in a meaningful way. Healthcare access, especially in rural communities, we are disproportionately affected financially for multiple reasons. Internet access can actually help with some of this. Telehealth services would be life-changing for so many members of the disability community. And one of the other big issues I'm running on is education funding. We need to make sure our schools are being funded in a way that ensures a world-class education for every child, regardless of ability or zip code. And I am looking forward to answering the questions this evening. Even more than that, I am looking forward to making sure the voice of the disability community is not only heard in Richmond, but that it's prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Chris Runyon, also from the 25th District.
Hi, Heather.
Hey.
So nice to see everybody, and thank you to both ARCs and for the community for putting this on. I tell you what, it's a privilege to be here tonight and a privilege to get to have a conversation about one of the most important issues that the Commonwealth has in front of us. I am a lifelong native of the Valley. My wife and I, both families are pre-Revolutionary War folks, and so we've been here a long time. We've got roots in the Valley. And we recognize the needs of our community because we've lived it our entire lives. And I will say that it's quite interesting to be able to sit down with folks like Heather, John over at Arc of the Piedmont, and Warren at Augusta, and to hear your specific amounts of information and questions and policy issues that we want to talk about. Because, you know, as a person in this community, I've been involved. I've helped with ARC over the years. Heather and I worked on a project through our Rotary Club a number of years ago. We painted a bunch of stuff, and that was a lot of fun. So I've done that over the years, and I really appreciate that. But I never understood, as just a private citizen, the challenges that folks face. And so by getting to know you all and getting to know many of the constituents, we've had a number of constituents that have reached out to us over issues relating to the developmental disability community. And through a collaborative process with ARC of Virginia, all the local ARCs, those citizens and other resources, we've been able to help people move forward in the journey that they're on. It's helped me better understand the complexity, really the broadness of the issue. And I look forward to having that conversation. One of the things that you ask is, talk about your personal involvement. I've been blessed to be able to carry 2 bills that working with ARC of Virginia. One was work groups to consider access and the use of virtual supports. As COVID pointed out, there are very many challenges to be able to have personal visits. And so during the emergency orders, we were able to do virtual. We'd like to study the ability to continue that. We want to make sure that it is functional and it works well and it provides for what our citizens need. And so there's a work group underway that talks about how do you build better access to assistive technology. what environmental modifications are necessary to help support those virtual supports. I'm really excited to be able to see the results of that work study coming out. And I think it's important to note that was a bipartisan effort that worked across party lines, because this issue is a bipartisan issue. The other bill that I carried and was successful in my first year in Richmond required IEP teams to develop guidelines to consider the need for age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate instructions relating to sexual health, self-restraint, self-protection, privacy, and personal boundaries. And Virginia was not in the right place on that. And we were able to work together, and I was real pleased to be able to work so closely with ARC of Virginia to be able to craft legislation that we worked through the committees, and was able to have that legislation signed. And it is a positive impact, not only on folks in the developmental disability community, but for citizens throughout the Commonwealth. It impacts everyone, and we truly appreciate that opportunity. Looking forward to tonight to continue our conversation. I'm sorry I got tongue-tied there. And to be able to learn and listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. From the 26th district, Bill Helsley, welcome, and please give us a little background on yourself.
Thank you guys very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I too am a lifelong resident of the Valley, and I've been a trial attorney for the last 36 years here in Harrisonburg. And it's the experience that I gathered there that I want to highlight tonight. I developed a subspecialty in my practice for a number of our friends and neighbors who have autism, Asperger's, Down syndrome. I developed a subspecialty of representing them in both criminal and civil affairs before the court. And unfortunately, what I found in Virginia was a system that was not very fair in my estimation, because not to get too much into the minutia, but in Virginia, we were never allowed to introduce into evidence developmental disabilities or anything along that line that could explain the behavior of our clients. And Virginia followed this crazy all or nothing rule, where either you were declared criminally insane, which is a very difficult, or you're considered with no troubles whatsoever. And for those of us who have worked with folks with Asperger's, Down syndrome, and so forth, you realize how unfair that is. I have advocated for 30 years or more that law needed to be changed. And I'm very happy to report, thanks to the General Assembly in 2021, they gave us two very, very important statutes that we can put in our quiver, so to speak. We now can bring up to the trier of fact, whether it be a jury or a judge, that someone has a developmental disability, so that it can be showed that maybe they didn't develop the specific intent necessary to commit a crime. Because as we all know, those of us who have worked with our friends and neighbors who have those disabilities, sometimes they see the world and interpret it a little differently than the rest of us. And there was a second statute that I'm very pleased that got passed that now allows first offender treatment on a number of criminal matters for those people with developmental disabilities. And just want to say, I'm not, even though I've worked with folks for the last 30 years, I'm like Randall, not an expert. I look forward to listening. But I think the most important thing that I can share with the folks is I care. I care about what's going on in this community. And I understand some of the tough times that other people have with their children, their friends, and their neighbors. And my door will always be open. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Bill. And also from the 26th district, Tony Wilt. Hi, Tony.
Hey, Heather, how are you?
Great, thank you.
It's good to see you again. It's been a little bit since I've seen you. So thank you so much for having this event. It's really great to be in this forum again. We've had them several times over the years, and it's always great to come together and hear your concerns. You're the experts in dealing with our most vulnerable citizens. And so it's always good to hear what the issues are that that are out there that may be barriers to helping our citizens. So probably, as a way of, where I'm at right now, one of the things that I'm most proud of is my daughter works for Pleasant View Homes. And so that's, she's the right person in the right job for that, if you were to know our daughter. And also one of the things that I had since I've been in the General Assembly, been in 11 years, and I was fortunate enough for a number of those years be able to sit on the board of the Virginia School for Deaf and Blind. And that was a great experience as well. Over the years, I've been fortunate enough to carry a number of pieces of legislation. I carried a piece of legislation one time that I worked with Vail, and to help address the neighborhood assistance program tax credit, make some improvements there. Worked also with DARS, updating the disability terminology and code to reflect current terms. As we all know, as you can look in the Code of Virginia, and some things get outdated, and we do that. And it was very important that be done in this particular instance. I also worked with the local brain injury association to require that brain injury training be part of the CIT, the crisis intervention training, the crisis intervention team, their training, because as we know, law enforcement, oftentimes, they're just, their job is to take care of a situation that they're faced with. And, it's very important that they are able to recognize an individual with brain injury. And so, I was very proud to carry that legislation, get it across the finish line, if you will, and to include that training. I was also very pleased to work on a piece of legislation that changed the definition of brain injury through the Department of Education. And what was happening, it was nobody's fault. It wasn't intentional, but there was a lapse in the educational opportunities for some of our citizens as they got older because of the definition of a brain injury. You're all very familiar with that. That it was, there was, was it before birth or during birth or after birth was the injury due to a trauma? Child gets hit in the head with a bat, let's say, something like that. But because of the wording in the code, there was a lapse in educational opportunities and support. And so the legislation I carried helped clear that up, and just very, very glad to be able to help that get over the finish line as well. And over the year, I've carried numerous budget amendments and also to go towards our disabled community. So again, I look forward to being here. It's always a great opportunity to hear the challenges, and my door has always been open. We've had meetings as with other groups, and I always look forward to looking for opportunities to help our most vulnerable citizens.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, and last but not least, the 58th district, and we'll start with Rob Bell.
Well, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
So we were asked to talk about our personal experiences with disabilities and some of the work we've done. And most of you have heard this story, but had no personal experiences as a young adult, went to law schools, actually took a class on some of these issues. And my wife was a teacher, so we had sort of an academic interested person issue. And then my son was born. And like, if this was a crowd, we would, if I could see everybody, this is where we kind of acknowledged this was a club we didn't remember trying to get into. And here we are. We're part of the fraternity or sorority where we have a disabled special needs child. And we started the odyssey that many people have. It started by pretending it hadn't happened. My parents were the ones that spotted it, and we were mad at them for months because we thought they were saying bad things about our kid. And then you start trying to get services through the schools. And we went through, and I counted it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 school settings in 7 years, as he was repeatedly suspended from very good schools. They were trying to make it work. And I know there's a question later on about sort of schools and options in schools. And I hope to hear what people say and maybe add a little bit there. But very hard on him and his family. It reached a point where his mother didn't want to get any phone calls during the school day because she figured that was the school calling to come and pick him up. And finally landed at VIA. Now, VIA is the Virginia Institute for Autism. Some people on this Zoom call probably have a child there, but that's been a godsend. And he's been there for a couple of years and has made significant progress within what he can manage, which is a very different. He's not going to go to college. He's not going to get married. He's not going to get a job. He's not going to move out of our house, at least not in the traditional sense. But it is helping him achieve what he can. And that's where he has been for some time. Now, what we are finding, like all parents do, is that we're looking at a cliff. He just turned 18. I just was appointed to be his guardian, so he'll be with us indefinitely. But we worry very much about what will happen when he turns 21, where we will receive services, how he will have some social outlet, what we will do. And so some of the questions I saw on the list are appropriate to that. Not surprisingly, this has led to some bills over the time that either I came up with or some other parent at the school brought to my attention, just to look at last year. And these are obviously bipartisan measures. Everybody on this call voted for them, and I assume everybody would. But the first was, one of the issues that special needs parents have that we were worried about is interactions with law enforcement. The disability itself makes it seem like you are being difficult, and also makes it hard to tell the law enforcement why what's happening is happening. And so 2 bills. One was, you may know this already, but some people could get an ID card that had a code on it that you could hand to the officer. We made that easier, made it easier for guardians to get that. And then the second is, there was a program to let license plates have an identifier, so that if a cop was making a traffic stop, he could know that there's going to be some issue when he gets up to the window. This wouldn't apply to many of us, certainly won't apply to my son, who will never drive. But for those who have special needs, kids who drive, boy, would really help before the officer comes up, if he knows, hey, this is somebody who needs a little bit more patience. If he's not answering the question, it may be just that there's an issue with communication, not an issue to try to obstruct justice. And then the last is, if anybody's gone through the guardianship process knows it is a very complicated, expensive, and long process. Many, I'm sure most families that could use a guardianship don't do it. And so recognizing this, there's something that in other states have used called supportive decision-making agreements. It's a little less formal. You're advising the person so they can make their own decision rather than making it for them. But for example, somebody goes into a bank, goes into the doctor, he can bring someone who's designated to help support that decision, can maybe ask questions and say, look, doctor, could you go through that again? I think you were talking a little fast, and I'm sure he can get it, but he needs a little more explanation than you just provided. Again, that's something that's worked in other states. That was a bill that passed this year. I'd like to echo, since I guess Sarah and I are at the end of this process, but thank the ARC for doing this. We look forward to your questions and comments and hearing from the other members of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And he's already introduced Sarah Radcliffe. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. And I will also try to keep it short, since I know that we're anxious to get to questions. My name is Sarah Ratcliffe, and I am also running to represent the 58th district in the House of Delegates. I grew up in the Midwest, but have been on the East Coast since college. For 30 years, I worked at the state level across the country with state legislators on public policy and a variety of issues. And really, my main focus was working on public policy, which keeps those with the least of our society at the center of those solutions. From my experience and the work that I did with these folks, including our friends in Richmond, I really realized that policy needs to be created in partnership with the community that it's going to benefit. And especially for the lives of folks, we must ensure that all of the voices are heard, no matter their political power, their station in life, or where they live in the state. It's very important, and I think this is why I want to work to ensure that the voices of all of our citizens are heard in Richmond. I think particularly this is doubly true when we're talking about the voices and needs of those in the disability community. Policy should be made in mind of lived experience, and I think that's really helpful. This race is really an important cap to my story and experience, coming from very meager means, being raised by a single mom who had challenges herself, to eventually being in leadership of a number of national organizations and fighting for the rights, and particularly in the last dozen years, fighting for autonomy and bodily autonomy for everyone. My husband as well came from a very meager means in South Texas, and we both came to rise in our careers. We've been very lucky, and we don't take that for granted for what we've been able to achieve, but we also see that as a responsibility. My personal experience with the disability community in particular is twofold. One is that I had the experience of helping 3 separate parents through their end-of-life journey, navigating that confusing and often challenging patchwork that can be medical care and hospice and care from home and all of the systems that can be very confusing for folks to have to figure out how to do that alone. I also was informed by my father's journey, which began with a 30-year career helping those dedicated to education and the care of the disability community as a publisher of testing and measurements, and to be able to create curriculum that better focused. Eventually, his journey took him with Alzheimer's disease, meant the deterioration of his abilities, and that our family found ourselves having to meet similar challenges of seeking care and services while trying to find the most independence for him possible as we worked through the deterioration of his abilities. I think that the history of services for and understanding about the disability community certainly has come very far, but we are still not serving our neighbors with disabilities anywhere near as much as the need has, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, in the questions. I believe the government is meant to be a force for good, and that those elected are supposed to use their power to help take care of each other and to make sure that our families and our community is as strong as it can be. I really think that that is one of the reasons why we need to ensure that the folks who are representing all of us in Richmond hear from the communities in need. That's why I'm running, and I really look forward to tonight's discussion on these important issues.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, thank you everyone for giving this wonderful introduction and background information. We are going into the question part of the forum right now, and we are hopefully going to get through all of them, but we'll start in with the first question. I just want to give the order that you're going to be responding so that you're not surprised when I call on you next. So we're going to start question 1 with John of Lily. Second will be Sam Soger. Chris Runyon, you're going to go next. And then Sarah, you'll be speaking, Sarah Ratcliffe. Tony Wilt will come in after Sarah. Randall Wolf after Tony Wilt. Rob Bell after Randall. And then Jennifer Kitchen after Rob. And Bill, like your last but not least on the first question. And that question is, Virginia has a waiting list of more than 13,000 people. I hope everyone is aware of that. 3,000 of those people are in urgent need for Medicaid DD waivers. These waivers fund home and community-based services that help people with developmental disabilities to live life fully included in their community. How would you help ensure our General Assembly makes ending this wait a priority so no one with a developmental disability is waiting for essential services? And I will just say that we have a family who has been waiting 20 years for a Medicaid waiver for their son, who is now approaching 40 years old, and they are approaching 70. So John, would you care to respond to that? John, you're going to have to unmute. Great.
This issue was dealt at length in the Health, Welfare and Institutions Committee in both sessions of the General Assembly, my first year and second year. And as with many of the issues, including most of those we'll discuss tonight, sadly, it comes down to money. As my dad used to tell me all the time, follow the green, son, follow the green. You follow the green, you'll understand what's going on. We need to ensure that providers have the capacity to care for people, more people, whether that is more workers, more beds, more facilities, et cetera. It goes with it. One major factor will be improving the reimbursement rate to offset costs associated with providing care. For example, minimum wage increasing capacity yearly. I have supported the budget bill in each of my 2 years as a delegate of the 20th district. 2001 budget stated that a portion of federal stimulus will be set aside to provide support payments to waiver providers disrupted by the COVID pandemic. Although we did not significantly allocate federal ARPA funds during the special session, which I was disappointed in, we still have more than $1 billion left to spend. I am hopeful and pray that we will use that money to follow through with our legislators, a legislative duty to provide in 220 session. Thank you, Heather.
Sam Sugar.
I will go in there and demand the funds be appropriated. There's just no question about it. These are our neighbors. This is our community, and we have to stand up for everyone in that community. The money is there. We just have to make sure that corporations are paying their fair share of taxes. The money is there, and I want to make sure that it gets appropriated to help the people in our communities live their best life. So I'll go down to Richmond and I'll be like, you need to appropriate those funds. We're going to find that money in the budget. Thank you.
Okay. Chris Runyon.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I think it's important to recognize that this is a commitment that everyone in the Commonwealth has to make. You know, folks in the DD community, developmental disability community, are some of our most vulnerable. And to be frank about it, I don't think we've handled it very well over the last number of years. And so it's an issue that as I learn more about it and understand more about it, I think we need to really focus and concentrate. We recognize the backlog has continued to grow. Several years ago, I think it approached 16,000. So we're a little bit from there, but we're not going in the right direction overall. And it's just heartbreaking to hear the stories of people that have been unable to get the waivers. Heather has shared with me the 20 years before. We have a constituent in another part of the district that's received a waiver, but it's not appropriate for the circumstance. And so their government has not met the needs of the individual. And so we've got to look back. We need to stop and say, why is the process not working? You know, we've got to have funding for direct service providers in conjunction with additional waivers. We're in a situation where we've added waivers, but we've not been able to fund, we've not chosen to fund the direct service providers adequately. And so 42% of the awarded waivers back earlier this year were unused because the families couldn't identify providers to help them with that. So there's a situation that we've got to have the system functioning, and we're struggling with that, to be honest with you. I think we also need to recognize that early investment plays big dividends. We've talked in the past couple of years about some states that maybe are doing it better. Arizona is one that I consistently hear, they do it very well. I'd like to see us, as part of the work study groups that we've got, so let's figure out what the best practices are. What is making Arizona's system work much better, apparently, than others? We can probably also learn from those systems that are doing it very poorly and figure out what we need to change to make a difference. Again, early investment, appropriate funding for the direct service providers, and concurrently funding with additional for waivers. We need to sit down on a bipartisan basis and fashion and craft a functional plan that needs to be individually focused in the best use of resources for the most inclusive of settings. And, you know, again, it's not an easy problem. It's a complicated problem, but we're very capable. We're very capable as a community, and we need to focus the resources, focus the attention, and get this problem. I believe we need to establish a plan, set a goal. We know where we want to end up. Let's put some hard and fast dates of what we want to achieve and then work forward on that. And yes, it's going to be expensive. I understand that. But I also understand that we've got folks in the Commonwealth that are really struggling to be able to provide for their families, to be able to be self-sufficient as much as possible. And as Delegate Bell talked about previously, folks are staring at the cliff, where we've got circumstances where older parents are still providing care to middle-aged folks in the developmental disability community. We've got new families that are just now coming into that. And then we've got, when these folks get to the 18 or I guess the 22-year age group, that cliff is staring at them. We've got to sit down and figure out how to commit the resources, prioritize the resources, and commit the resources in effective ways. I'm personally committed to do that and look forward to working with everybody, regardless of what their political persuasion is, to achieve those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah Ratcliffe?
Thank you. I think that, as others have said, it is partly about money and putting our resources into and making the commitment to put our resources toward this to get it done. My experience, similar to these waivers, my dad, when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 55, was not eligible for Medicare. So there was at that time a 2-year waiting period. And to know that he had not had any health insurance, and so to know that he had to wait is almost more frustrating, to know that help is available, but yet you must wait. You must wait your turn. I think that, as many have said, the experience, especially with a waiting list as long as this, that the needs of the folks on the list, whether it's the 13,000 people or the 3,000 in urgent need, are going to change by the time the list gets to them. So I think that in addition to putting resources in to eradicate the list, or to at least lessen the list, we also, the reality is our systems, healthcare, community services, mental health, disability management, are far overwhelmed by the need. So we need to find more service providers, yes. We need to make sure that folks have the knowledge and understanding of what services might be available and how they might fit those together. But we really need to be reassessing and making sure that folks are being communicated with as we go through this process of making those resources available, so that the folks on the list, their circumstances are going to change, whether because of aging parents or because of their own abilities shifting as they get into different parts of their lives. So we need to also make sure that this is a moving target, but that we are perhaps putting those with the most need at the top, while shrinking the list as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Sarah. Tony, Wilt?
Yeah, it's certainly a crucial need to have the funding for the waiver slots. That goes hand in hand with the reimbursement rates, to have individuals there. And as Delegate Runyon said, I mean, we left waivers on the table because we didn't have enough people to fill the slots. And that's been a challenge for a while now. But certainly the pandemic and legislation required raising the minimum wage and so forth, that didn't help the situation. And so we still, we have to try to address that. And so this past year, past session, we had language to say that, all right, so any new federal funds coming forward, we were going to put it towards helping to solve this problem, right? And so when we were called back into the special session, well, number one, in special session, basically all legislators were told that you're not going to have a voice in this process. We're going to decide how to spend the federal money, and you don't get input into it. And I mean, that was very disheartening. But I ignored that. I mean, I contacted the chairman of appropriations, Chair Torian, and Vice Chair Sickles, and I told them of this problem. that, it was clear that the state was going to fund the state facilities. But what about the community-based facilities? Please at least give equal funding to them. But as we all know, that didn't happen. So, but I will commit, as was stated earlier, there's still a chunk of money out there, and going back into the next session, that's going to be a priority of mine to continue to fight for that, to get these funding, get this funding available.
Thank you, Tony. Randall Wolf?
Sorry, thank you. Obviously this is a funding issue and a structure of that funding, but with this level of people in need and the time of this, it also sounds like an oversight and accountability issue. And so somewhere there needs to be recourse for those families to a different agency or oversight group to be able to really push this forward and get it done. And we need to shy on helping people versus not helping them. So finding ways to get this done is where we need to be. It also needs to be a state issue, not just counting on so many great nonprofits and other organizations. I think we need to build this out as a state, really state agencies that connect to all zip codes, all rural areas, as well as urban, in order to support people where they need to be supported. And that just can't always happen when you're counting on the goodwill of communities to do their best, but they may not have the support. So accountability and recourse, I think, are two steps that haven't been mentioned yet. And I'm glad as well to hear that this is not only a bipartisan, but a nonpartisan issue. This is something we all collectively need to figure out how to get it done and work together on. So I look forward to that opportunity.
Thank you, Randall. Rob Bell, your position?
I think that we should probably start by remembering what the waiver is. Everyone on this list would qualify for the residential care that we used to call the training centers. And this was if the most recent one was, I guess down in Amherst, we say Lynchburg, but down in Amherst. And it was a massive, huge facility on probably a couple hundred acres. And it was truly residential, and families would drop their children off there and visit. And aside from that, they would live there. And the waiver is you waiving that outcome. You're choosing to do something else. And you go, well, why would you do that? Well, because it's a better outcome. I think that, everything from the courts to families to the consumers all would say, I want my kid at home. I don't want him to be at a facility where I visit him once a week or once a month. I can help provide care. However, I need help. And that's what the waiver is supposed to do. And they have a laundry list of things that they can provide. I think the one that catches everybody's attention is respite. We can count the number of times we've taken a trip without my son on the fingers of one hand. And it's going to get harder, not easier. And it's exhausting. And you love them and you care more than anybody else in the world, but you need a break once in a while. And so the respite, I think, is just crucial if we're going to have families take care of people at home, not just trained medical care, but just literally he will be safe while I go for an afternoon or a weekend or some kind anyway. So the respite care is there. There are, of course, just what they call companion services, providing some social interaction for your loved one in the house. There's adaptive things. Many people need something done at the house or in the car to make it usable for them. It can provide job training, job coaches. I know there's a question about that. We should talk about that. But that's what the waiver does. Now, I had them run the numbers, and it's a little different. This is the number as of, I guess, a week ago. 14,257 are on the waiting list, and they break it into priorities, of course. Priority 1 is urgent, right now, need it. Priority 2 is within 1 to 5 years, and priority 3 will be needed a little further down the road, but you can see it just as often the child's in school and when they're going to hit 21. The average cost annually, because of course, once you're on it, it's adjustable, but it's an annual cost, not just one time, $57,853. So with just simple math, it comes to about $200 million. That includes both the community living, which is the group homes, I made sure I got the terminology right because this is not a stage we're at yet, but family and individual services, and then which is sort of staying with your family, and then building independent slots where they're trying to get you sort of to a new level of independence. And it's, all of those, but in the priority one list is $200 million. The question was, how do we get there? I think that there are other places in the governmental system where there's a big price tag attached to something and a priority. And the example I would say is most close to this in my knowledge is what we've done with mental health. There's a commission called the Deeds Commission, and I'm looking around. I don't think any of the other legislators are on it, at least not right now, but it's focused more on mental health than on DD issues or DD waiver issues. But what we had done is established a list of priorities from top to bottom and said, as the money becomes available, we advocate for as much as we can, but if you can only give some, here's what we need. And so in this space, I would think that, at least for my purposes, and we'd want to listen to the families, but it's the priority one families that need it right now, this instant. And it's not that you want to put off the other priorities at all, but those are the ones that need it right now. And so that would be how I would suggest the ARC and other sort of advocacy groups make clear what your priorities are. You can have we need it right now, we need it tomorrow, we need it next week, and then sort of the more aspirational things further down the list. But that's what I think would be a way to advocate for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Kitchen?
Yes, so I would be the consistent, relentless voice pushing to fully fund the waivers. We need to take a look at all of the places wasteful spending can be cut, and we need to look at new ways of creating capital, new revenue streams. Thank you, legalized cannabis. And we need to make sure that the money that the Commonwealth has is being used to serve all Virginians. Virginia has a history of not living up to its obligations to the disability community. In 2012, our Commonwealth was found to be in violation of the Americans with Disability Act by the Department of Justice because our legislature was not providing funding for the services we are required to offer by law. We cannot make this mistake again. We must do better. It is not fiscally it is completely fiscally unsound to wait until a person is in crisis to step in to help. It costs much less money to help folks who are on the waiver list before they reach crisis level. In the House of Delegates, I will be an advocate for the disability community, partly because it's personal, and partly because I work in the field and I know how important it is to get folks help as early as possible. And I will make it one of my top priorities to ensure that every person on the wait list gets waiver funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Bill Helsley?
Yes. For me, the issue is that it's very unacceptable that we have 13,000 or more people on the waiting list. And that you mentioned that some people have been waiting 20 years to receive funding from this. And for me, it gives me a visceral reaction in my stomach that we're living in 2021 in the richest nation that the world has ever seen. And we take our vulnerable people and have them waiting 20 years to get funding. You judge a society by its priorities, and you can generally determine the priorities by where money is raised and by where money is spent. And for me, I find the current state of affairs unacceptable. I think it was Hubert Humphrey who told us you judge a society not by how much wealth it creates, not by how many millionaires it creates, but by how you treat the most disadvantaged folks among you. And I don't think we look really great as a society today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, for question 2, we're actually going to skip to 3 because we were selecting 3 questions from the list provided to each of the candidates. And we want to make sure that we cover those topics that have the broadest range. And then we can go back to the other questions later if we have time. So for the second question, we're actually going to be looking at question 3 on your list. And I'll read that for the audience after I let you know what order you'll be speaking in. Jennifer Kitchen, you're going to get to go first. Randall Wolf will be next. Rob Bell, then Bill Helsley, then Chris Runyon, Sam Soger, Tony Wilt, Sarah Ratcliffe, and John Avoli. And the question for the audience is, a large number of Virginians with developmental disabilities rely on a direct service professional, we call them DSPs, for at least some level of daily support. Current reimbursement rates for Medicaid services, Medicaid waiver services, are structured to yield an average annual salary of under $23,000, which has contributed to high turnover rates in this critical field, instability for already vulnerable families, and a lack of financial security for DSPs. How can the Commonwealth address this issue in the upcoming session and help provide some stability to both waiver recipients and their caregivers? And it was mentioned, by Tony, I think the increase in minimum wage and everything that's going to be coming up. How would you address this situation, Jennifer?
Okay, so direct service professionals provide essential services for the disability community. They assist clients with daily personal tasks, including bathing and dressing. They help with housekeeping. They help clients organize and maintain a schedule. They help folks get to appointments. They are priceless companions for so many, and there's really no substitute for what they're offering. We don't treat them like professionals providing a necessary service. Direct support professionals usually get paid through waivers. We need to address the waiver reimbursement rate. But that's a rate that Virginia has agreed to, and we need to look deeply at and prioritize those people. Those rates are entirely too low. We only pay direct support professionals, it's $22,600 a year through the waiver reimbursement. You cannot support a family on that. You can't support yourself on that. Most direct support professionals have to work multiple jobs, or they just end up leaving the profession. Almost half of them leave the field within the first year. And that makes it hard for folks with disabilities to have consistent quality care, which is what they absolutely need in their daily lives. And in the House of Delegates, I will fight to increase the waiver reimbursement rate so that direct service professionals can actually stay in the field, making a livable wage that they can support themselves and their families and continue to help the people that they so desperately want to. That's why they go into this profession to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Randall Wolf?
Not much to add to what Jennifer said, who knows this up close and personal. We just need to increase the pay scale for this. We underestimate, caregivers and their value. It's just really unfortunate. And we need to increase the budget. We need to pay them better. We need to empower them to want to do that as a career of care. And that just will stabilize so many other things for the people they're caring for. We need to fight and increase the budgets and add to those waiver fees. It's simple. Thank you.
Rob Bell?
I'm probably going to say this a couple times. I think there are different aspects of this that probably have different solutions. So DSPs often refer to those that don't have some kind of nursing degree, but there are some who do. And I do think that we visited a community college last week that has 300 signups for 100 nursing slots. And I bring that up only because it's a pipeline issue. We don't have enough getting out at the other end. And goodness, the community college doesn't like to turn away anybody. That's not its role or its purpose. They're supposed to, or at least they intend to take everybody that wants the training. And so in this instance, that we could increase the number of available workers by increasing the pipeline. I think that's a back it up a little bit approach, but I think they would at least get some more of these trained workers. Now, in terms of the ones who are not currently seeking or do not have that training, there's a few issues. I think the one that we've all identified is simply money. It's a more attractive job. You'll have more people sign up. You'll have more people stay if the wages are better. I also think that the studies have said that once you get them in the door, money is a crucial part, but it's not the only part. If they're going to stay, they need to have some kind of career security and career track for additional training. They may well wish to take some of these nursing classes, although they didn't start that way. They might be where they end up. I do think that predictability of funding is therefore important. If you're trying to say to someone, here's what you get in year 1, here's what you get in year 3, here's what you get in year 5, you actually have to have some idea and certainty that the money's going to be coming. Now, in terms of money, this is a good example, though, of the kind of place where we would say as policymakers, this is where the prioritization matters, because that number I came up with, $200 million just to get the initial current crop, is dependent on the current reimbursement rates. And so we can, of course, increase those, but that would increase the overall figures. Now, some may say we can do it all. First year, every dollar, every person, every program will be increased. If that's not possible, then the question would be, how do we prioritize those choices? Because those choices cost money. You may say we prefer A or we prefer B, but those are the kind of choices that ultimately have to get made when you're making the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Bill Helsley?
Yes, I would basically echo the comments that Jennifer made and Randall made and Mr. Bell just made. And I think we clearly have to raise the rates so that we attract better people. I think that's sort of a consistent theme that we're all saying here. So I won't beat the proverbial dead horse, and that's what I believe.
Thank you. Chris Runyon, do you have anything to speak to on the topic?
I do, and I appreciate that. I think we need to recognize the value of the direct service providers and recognize that it's an integral component, it's a critical component to the overall system. And respite care, when we talk about that, when we talk about special services that they're providing, all those things come in to improve the quality of life, to meet the commitments that we've got, but just really to address the needs of the individuals and the families. And so, excuse me. So let's recognize that it all has to work together. As we've talked about earlier, the waiver process and the direct service providers, they're integrated. We've got to work on that together. And as Delegate Bell said, policymakers need to prioritize the funding on this. We need to decide what is available, the resources available, and move forward. And, are there are there resources that are being concentrated elsewhere that could be moved into this area that we really believe that I personally believe that these are superior to some of the other things that money gets spent on. And so let's address those things. I think more long-term, we've got to figure out how to grow the pool of applicants so the resources are greater. And as Delegate Bell, he talked about, a career path and an educational path and having opportunities in the various educational levels, whether it be in secondary school or in career and technical education centers or in higher education, to develop the curriculum and train the individuals so that they can either receive certifications or degrees or whatever's appropriate to be able to go into these fields. And again, I think it is important to note there is a work group study underway talking about this, and some of the preliminary findings, no surprise, we're not paying enough money. That's an employment problem throughout the country. And so it is certainly true in this. But that group is going to come out with a report sometime later this fall that's going to address the particular circumstances of what we've got. I think my understanding is we're going to address this on a regional basis because we recognize that Southwest Virginia has different needs. And the problems oftentimes are the same, but the circumstances around them and the resources may be different. And so we're going to address this by a geographical basis. I think we're going to be able to address this by the various levels of care needed. And so those things make sense. I think it's a great opportunity to step back and say where we are today. Let's figure out what we need to move to. And as I spoke to earlier, let's establish a plan that creates an end date, a date saying we're going to have Virginia at this place with our developmental disability community. And this is just one component of that. And I know it's frustrating if you're I had a constituent a few months ago call, and their respite care provider would call, or the company would call minutes before the provider was supposed to show up and say, we don't have anybody for you today. And that is just devastating on an individual and a family. And so again, go back to the resources, the priority, and the commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Sam Soger, would you like to add anything?
Sure thing. My delegate is against raising the minimum wage. Like, that's a big part of his campaign, is to say that $15 an hour, that's just too much money to be paying a fast food worker. Well, $15 an hour is more money than these caregivers are receiving on an annual basis. So I think if you have leadership like that, that's standing in the way of people having a standard of living, a living wage, well, we're not in good shape. If I go to Richmond, I want to make sure that someone who's doing as important job as giving care, they should be compensated immensely for something like that. They should be living a nice life and not having to worry about how to pay the bills. That's super important. And so making sure that all Virginians have a living wage is something that I'm very much about. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Wilt?
Yes. So I think it is important to note that back, as I referenced earlier about the special session and doling out the federal monies, that there was a $1,000 bonus for personal that was allotted for personal care attendants, and also I think it was a 12.5% increase to the Medicaid reimbursement rates. And that's for 2022 for DD waiver providers. And also in that, there is that study that Delegate Runyon mentioned. And so I think combined with these things, that's going to be very important what that study shows. I mean, we already know a lot of the problems. They've been mentioned here, and we've been talking about them for several years. And so, my commitment is going to be to work off that study and try to, put the funding where it needs to be and shoring up the workers that like we need to.
Thank you. And next, Sarah Radcliffe.
Hi, I apologize. I had to jump off on a different device. My internet was bad. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks. I think that this issue is about two things. One is caregiving and how we value it. And the second is about flexibility and how folks need to get the help and from whom. I consider myself and identify as a caregiver. I know many of us are, if by vocation, if not avocation. As a member squarely set in the sandwich generation, caring for children and elderly parents at the same time, I personally am aware of the pressure and exhaustion that can come with the best job that you'll ever have. But certainly that's felt even more so by dedicated professionals. We have heard time and again during these last 18 months from the frontline workers, and especially those in nursing and home health care positions, how exhausted they are and how burnout they are and how concerned they are about their own families. As many have mentioned, the folks who do this work are essential for this community to survive and for the families supporting them to be able to do other things, to be able to have the flexibility to have folks at home who need to be cared for in different ways rather than having to put them in a facility, for example. It is imperative for us as a society that values, needs, and literally could not survive without these healthcare worker positions and dedicated professionals, to pay them well enough to ensure that they can dedicate themselves to the work that they love and the jobs they want to keep, while not having to have their own families suffer from being underpaid. It is an imperative.
Thank you. John Avoli? And sorry, John, could you unmute?
Going
you.
last, Heather, most everything has been said. I have learned in the last couple of years as a delegate to the 20th district that the political environment, wherever it may be, at either at the federal level or at the state level, won't fix anything unless it's broken. And then when it's broken, we are up against the wall. I work closely with the folks at Western State with the same issue. It's about funding, it's about money. And where's it come from? And, you know, have Western State and across the street is Chick-fil-A. It's $15 an hour. While the other folks are making 11 and caretaker. I mean, that's what you're dealing with, folks. I will also say this to you, Heather and Warren. The other thing that I've learned in Richmond is that the wheel that squeaks the loudest gets the grease, folks. And I'm going to tell you, when you go to the HWI committee, the stories that we hear, not only from Mark, but from every other livable, workable program that requires funding is heard loud and clear from everyone. It's a matter of prioritizing it. I was disappointed this year in that the ARPA money was an excellent opportunity to add to these coffers and upgrade the living wages of these people. I know the mental health people were infused a tremendous amount of money, and yet this one was left out. It just hopefully for me that when we go back in session, when we have $1 billion left in ARPA money and funds, that we do some allocation to that and make it another priority, not only for these folks, but golly neds, we've got problem right now with all employees in the Commonwealth that are state employees and trying to keep up with the private sector. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is question 4 on your sheet. And we're going to be asking Tony Wilt will go first, Sarah Ratcliffe will be second, Bill Helsley will be next, then John Avoli, Jennifer Kitchen, Rob Bell, Sam Soger, Chris Runyon, and Randall Wolf. And that question is regarding a recent study in Virginia that shows that a large number of students with developmental disabilities would like, but are not able to receive appropriate supports in their local public schools, in large part because of services funding that remains almost exclusively accessible only to students who are placed in outside, less integrated private day schools. Local divisions and advocates have been working for several years to provide choice to students and families in the educational placement that works best for each student. How do you think Virginia can better support schools and students to provide the funds necessary services they need in their least restrictive environment, whatever that may be or wherever that may be? And so, Tony,
Yep.
You get to go first this time.
Sure, thanks, Heather. So, you know, we passed a bill this year that will allow CSA service funding to transition students from private education to the public school setting. So, you know, that's a small step. But also there's the study, the bill requires, you know, the secretaries of education, health and human resources, with Office of Children's Services, Department of Education, to form a work group and you know, develop a plan to direct those funds, you know, to be more effective with those funds and to accomplish what we want to do to get those students you know, transitioned over.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Sarah?
I'm sorry, was it my turn? I couldn't quite hear you.
Yeah, thank you. No problem, Sarah.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with the technology.
Would you
I
prefer?
think that again, no, I can answer it. I think that if I understand the question, I think that this is really about, much like housing and care, it's really about flexibility. For some people, for some students, public schools and finding programs that will work is the best place where they can be most independent and socialize in the way that they need to. For some folks, a more specialized environment is better. We need to make sure that the choice is about what the student needs and what they and their family believe is going to be best for them, rather than because we don't have enough of teachers or supports or programs. It is not the case that every student is going to succeed in every environment, but the only way for us to make it, the only way to give each individual who is going through this and each individual family who is helping to put that student into the most success is to make sure that we have the support across all of those environments so that we are able to tailor it more to the student's needs rather than what happens to be available in the coffers. That means putting more funding in more places and putting more flexibility into the system so that folks can adjust as need be.
Thank you. Bill Helsley?
I think that we need to look at the specific needs of each student, and we need to develop a program about what the student needs more than what resources that we have. We have to tailor it to the student. I have seen that most studies show that when you integrate people into the mainstream, that the outcome for success is much better for that student. The outcomes are much better for that student. Now, we all know that that probably will not work for everyone, but in the circumstances where it does work, I think that we need to be able to have the resources available so the person who is capable of being in the more mainstream setting should be allowed to. I've had some friends who have done that, and they had a pretty good smile on their face when they realized they were with other students. It made them give them a lot of dignity and self-worth. And for me, that means a lot to see somebody have a smile on their face because they feel a part of that group. I think that's important.
Thank you. John Avoli?
Yeah, okay, there we are. I always say this when I speak about education. I'm a recovering high school principal, okay, for many, many years. And one of the beauties of public education is that when a school door opens every morning, public schools welcome everyone. We do not have the right to say, you can't come, you can't come, you got to go somewhere else. So what we're really speaking about here is some school choice issues that we need to deal with. The process of individualized instruction is already there. Is a perfect? No, it's called an IEP that has been there forever, and it is the individual needs of each student is taken care of and met. When we deal with choice situation, I've always said, and I'm on record, and I'll keep saying it over and over again, if we're going to do school choice and we're going to deal with a voucher situation, if I am a parent of a special needs child and I want to take my kid to a school who is accepting these issues and students, then I cannot be denied that, whoever my kid is, whether he's autistic or whether he's special needs, whatever it may be. Otherwise, we're in a discriminatory situation here. Now, is it feasible to do that? And Bill, you probably said it well. It's the needs of everyone. You need to take care of individuals and what they are. But I'm a strict believer that public ed has done well for ages and ages. And unfortunately, some of the laws that are being made in Richmond today have a detrimental effect on public ed. And it does restrict and take away the freedoms from local school boards. That's why we have local school boards. And these decisions should be and must be made at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Kitchen?
So Virginia can better support students, their families, and educators by being more open to actually listening to and involving these folks in the problem-solving process. And we know we need to make a very large investment in our education system, and this should absolutely involve funding to provide resources and training for educators so IDD students and their families have more of a choice in what environment they are educated. The goal is always to provide choices so that IDD folks can live the most inclusive, dignified, and independent life possible. And that needs to start as early as possible in the public education system. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Bell?
Well, so I think that this is a place where we can underline what several speakers have said about kids are different, but then therefore not try to have one solution as is suggested by the question. And so, you know, we've heard IEPs, individual education plan, I guess, has been our life. And an IEP means that you always have the right to approach your administrators and say, I want an IEP. The IEP can then, you have a meeting, and you typically, in my experience, bring in, you have everything from principals to the counselors, to the teacher, to the tutors. If they're hostile, you have lawyers. And then you raise your voices and you fuss a lot, and everybody cares and their hearts are in the right place. And you try to figure out what's going wrong, and then try to see if there is something new that can be offered, because usually, at least in my experience, there's not much dispute that it's not going well. And so if you had, 9 suspensions in kindergarten, or whatever the number was that we had, or dozens over the course of the next few years, we don't necessarily know what the answer is. We do know that we've got a problem. Now, we are not, I would say that there are students who have such profound disabilities that it is unrealistic to expect that the solution is going to be within the standard public schools. And so the school my son attends it's called a private day academy. It has an exceptionally specialized approach and curriculum. And they've got a handful of kids. At one point, I think they said 17 counties send kids to that school. Well, that means every system is sending a few. And I think that for us, the IEPs were a series of great frustrations, notwithstanding the good intentions, wishes of almost everybody who participated. Oh my goodness, we would walk away both impressed and sad with how much they cared, but how little they were able to provide an answer. And so I do think that, least restrictive environment is great where it works. And I think that the school should work hard. And if that's what the parents and the kids want, it can be wonderful, because sometimes I want to make it Pollyanna, but sometimes the other kids rise to the occasion. And instead of being mean to the different kid, they actually really rise up. But other times it isn't. And, there are a bunch of cliches that float around, and I've certainly heard them. Boy, your son must be really smart at math. No. Oh, he must be really nice. Everybody I know who's disabled is really nice. But no, he's a teenager. He has good days and bad. He's got people he likes and people he doesn't like. His brain doesn't work. The world is harder for him to navigate. And so actually his frustration level is higher. But if you had trouble ordering a sandwich at a McDonald's, you would be frustrated too. No, and so for him, it wasn't, we actually look back and say, I wish we'd found some way to navigate the IEP system a couple of years sooner, because it's only when he got to an outside system that they had the resources and expertise and specialization to get him the progress that he has made. And so I think that, I don't know that we're all saying different things, but the IEPs are great. You have really well-intentioned, smart people, but absent having some options to try. Again, we tried, oh my goodness, a school in Culpeper. We tried a special needs school in Charlottesville. We tried homebound. We tried a sort of a private arrangement. We tried three different public schools. And at each step, after a certain length of time, one time was years, another one took 6 days. They threw up their hands and said, we just can't, this is not something that's going to work. So let's try something new. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Sam Soder.
Education is paramount. I think we need to be spending as much money as possible on education. This is the number one thing. And if we're in Richmond, yeah, we all need to be working really hard towards that. As I think Bill said earlier, a society should be judged, not on how many successful businessmen it has, but really by how everyone in the society is doing. How are the ones that are already at a disadvantage? How are we lifting those folks up? So I really believe in inclusivity, and I think that inclusive and integrated classrooms, where appropriate, where applicable, we should make sure that all the funding is there for that, all of the resources, the personnel necessary to make our classrooms inclusive, because I think that that's a benefit to everybody in the classroom, of course, and a benefit to the whole community. And I would like to speak about school boards for a moment, because I think it's important to point out that there are lots of parents around Virginia right now that feel very uncomfortable with the situation with their school boards, that you could have school board members that are incompetent and are actually very exclusive, that are about excluding, and that are, like, you have school board members around the Commonwealth right now that are like anti-public education. How is that supposed to work? You know what I'm saying? So I want to see our educators empowered, and I want to see our representatives, and I would love to represent us and empower our educators. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Chris Runyon?
I'm sorry, I had my mouse covered up. So, you know, this is quite an interesting topic, and it's a critical topic. As you investigate and you have conversations with people, I think you better understand the complexities. And I think Delegate Bell mentioned earlier that what may be appropriate for one individual isn't necessarily appropriate to the other. And so that points to the flexibility needed. We need to recognize that the CSA money, the Children's Services Act money, it is public funds, and currently it's exclusively available to those students outside of into private day schools. And, you know, again, we hear from, and Delegate Bell talks about his son's positive interaction or positive experience with the one he's in. He also talks about the challenges it took to get there. The concept of the least restrictive, most appropriate environment, I think, is the concept we need to move forward with our eyes wide open. We need to understand that we need to really provide the resources and then the flexibility for those individual people, those individual families, to be able to address the educational needs that they have. And the IEP program, I think, gives that good beginning and that basis. I think there's some additional information that's probably necessary or conversation. And I think, you know, I wrote down some of my notes is that we need to recognize and collaborate among all the stakeholders involved. And it was an interesting conversation I had several weeks ago with a school superintendent in this region. And he and I talked about the potential to create a pilot program of a regional, kind of a quasi public school environment, but also where necessary or when it's appropriate for the student to be in more like a day school setting. But that the public schools could have a hand in this. And it may we're very early in the conversations. It may be that it could be a collaborative venture between a private day school and a public school setting. It may not. I don't know how that type of thing will work, but I think it's important to ask the question, talk to folks that are providing the various services and say, what are the ideas? What can we do to make this better? Parents and individuals certainly have a voice at the table, a tremendous voice at the table. So do our education professionals, both within the public system and out. And I think as a legislator, it's incumbent on us to put those folks together so they can have conversation and so we can figure out what is the best way to move forward for the citizens of the Commonwealth. And if you keep focused on that, then I think we can end up being where we need to be. It's not going to be easy, but I do think that I am optimistic that we can move forward in those collaborative type exercises. Thank you.
Randall Wolf?
Yes, thank you. First, I think we want to strive to integrate, not segregate. And we want to mainstream these students as best we can. You know, that's how life works, and that's what we need to empower them. But I also want to say thank you to Delegate Bell for sharing his personal experiences. And I recognize too that some students are going to need separate help and separate schooling. But we also can't do a have and have not situation where I know a single mother with a child who's pretty severely autistic, who chose to move from where she was living in a county to move into a school, a city school, because they had better support for kids with autism. That's an unfair burden on families. If we're going to be the state or the Commonwealth of Virginia, we need to provide this across the entire state and not just in more wealthy areas to be able to provide this sort of support, and rural or poorer areas not to have that same level of support. So we need to be the ones that balance that out and really make sure that this kind of care and ability to be fully educated, is everywhere, is available for all citizens of the Commonwealth. And as far as, and I think that touches on school boards. Some school boards prioritize some of this and some don't. And that's, again, where we as delegates and the state need to step in and make sure that this really is an equal opportunity for all students with developmental disability. So yeah, it's going to take money, but we need to commit to this. This is a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next question that we'll be addressing is question 4 on your list. Recent study in Virginia, question 5. The General Assembly has made great advancements in the last 5 years to fund housing subsidies set aside for people with developmental disabilities. The result has been an increase in people living independently with supports and having happier lives. However, that can only be sustained with ongoing state funds, as many people with developmental disability have a monthly income of just $791 from Social Security benefits. How do we ensure we keep fully integrated, affordable housing accessible? And the order that we're going to go to this is John Avoli, Sam Soger, Chris Runyon, Sarah Ratcliffe, Tony Wilt, Randall Wolf, Rob Bell, Jennifer Kitchen, and Bill Helsley. So John, would you like to lead this off? How do we ensure we keep fully integrated, affordable housing accessible?
Well, it's like we've talked about all night. It's about money, and it goes back to that. Affordable housing in general is a challenge right now. We know that. It's a challenge everywhere because of the demand for housing. In many instances, landlords may prefer not to deal with a program that involves subsidized support from a state agency, and that's a fact. However, certain work and colleagues, we can work and work through this and to maintain support towards the affordable housing. I think it's imperative. And I do know that ownership, independent living is probably one of the greatest things we can do for people with disabilities. That gives them a different perspective on life, and it just enhances their whole demeanor. It's kind of like when you got your first bicycle, you had a little bit of independence with it, and that's what happens with it. Thank you.
Okay. Sam Soder?
Yep, absolutely. We gotta demand this in the budget. This is so important, and that's what it takes is the subsidies, but it's incentivizing. Let's make it work for the landlords and caregivers. And yeah, at the end of the day, like we've all been saying, we need to make sure that everyone in our society is getting a fair shake, and this is part of that. So let's make it happen.
Thank you. Chris Runyon?
Thank you, Heather. I think there's a number of issues that we need to talk about in this. And again, I mentioned in my previous answer about collaboration, and this is another great example that we need to sit at the table. We need to understand, identify where the problems are, and then make sure we've got the stakeholder groups in. You could put down a laundry list of things that we need to talk about: innovative zoning, increased density, recognize that the varied environments that folks are in, whether it be in an urban setting, kind of a ex-urban setting, very rural setting, all those things apply or impact what the opportunities are for the housing, how we can address the housing needs of the various folks in the developmental disability community. I think paramount would be local flexibility. And so you've got to have a conversation with localities to understand where they see the problem areas, where can they feel like they can step forward. And then, we obviously are going to include all the stakeholders in this. And so the families and the folks in the developmental disability community have to be sitting at the table for doing that. We need to recognize oftentimes there needs to be a continuum of options for various levels of care. And as we think about it, again, I go back to Delegate Bell had referred to in previous conversations with me, and I think maybe tonight, the cliff. And, needs for housing as the caregivers get aged, and sometimes they are in need of support too. So how do we address that? And, make sure that we're paying attention. It's a relatively predictable circumstance. And so let's make sure that we're addressing that. And we also need to make sure that we remove the wrong incentives from, from letting communities not be able to step up to be able to address this issue. We talked about funding. Again, that is the common theme. We need to prioritize funding. We need to address what the problems are in an open, honest, and transparent manner. And then let's address the funding needs. And there are going to be folks in the Commonwealth that are going to be unhappy to lose funding to transfer it into these areas. But to be honest with you, I think that's what we've got to be committed to do. There are some other various interesting things I've got in my notes. Some various opportunities. There's a place in Albemarle. It's called the Inns Free Village. And I didn't have my handwriting very clear there. But I've done a little research on that. And as we get to the point that they're able to have folks come in and visit, I think it's really an opportunity. Delegate Bell may be able to speak to more on that. I think he's familiar with it as well. But over there, they figured out opportunity to be able to deliver, provide housing in a innovative manner that allows folks to live the lives that they want. And we're not isolating people from community. That's not what we want to accomplish, but we also want to recognize that there are special needs and special circumstances that we need to cover. So funding, flexibility, and an honest and open conversation about the issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah Ratcliffe?
Thanks so much. I think many of these answers are the same. What we want most is enough funding for these programs and waivers to ensure the best flexibility and best situation for each person. My father, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease at an early age, was on Social Security disability income, and eventually, after we spent down all of his money, was subject to Medicaid funding in order to maintain his housing. He went from living on his own with some supplemental help to come in from family and others, to living with me, to a retirement community with specialized care, to an adult group home, to one of 3 full-time nursing care facilities as we found one that worked. In each of those transitions, he had to adjust to a new set of rules, new rooms, new residents, and how he was going to share his life and in what capacity he was going to be able to be independent and do what he wanted to do. The best and the most independent living is almost always the best for folks to live their best life. For some, that's with living at home with supplemental care, training, facility caregivers. For others, it's better to live in a facility that has more structure and more on-site help. But it shouldn't be that the rate that folks can get a waiver, or the funding for different kinds of housing, or the levels of supplemental income that's available to those living at home should be less, forcing folks to live in situations that they'd prefer not to, just to make sure they have the support to live their lives. I think that we need to rethink how this community is treated and seen. We're talking about numbers, we're talking about whether it's the list or the available housing, or all of the things we've been talking about this evening. The bottom line are these are individuals. These are families and individuals who deserve to have their lives not be treated like a balance sheet. We need to find the funding, but we also need to restructure the system so that we can ensure that these folks are given the autonomy and independence that they deserve.
Thank you. Tony Wilt?
In 2020, fiscal year 2021, the General Assembly allotted monies through the competitive loan pool, I think, to create about 380 units. So, you know, that's a positive there. But as we're talking here, I think a theme that, well, a theme for everything's been funding, but on this particular topic, it was pointed out earlier, affordable housing. I mean, that is an issue that is hitting almost every sector of our society. I mean, there's some people that I guess cost is not an issue, but for a large part, you know, from our middle class, lower class, you know, individuals, that's a real challenge. But, you know, what we see is, I think Delegate Runyon mentioned, as far as, you know, regulation and those types of things, land use issues and so forth. So overall, we're putting stress on available and affordable housing. And I feel that naturally translates into the problem that we're talking about here. You know, so when you have a very limited resource, what the people that control those resources, what are they going to go for? They're going to go for the higher dollar, the biggest bang for the buck, if you will. And so that's, you know, that's the broad challenge. And unfortunately, it's you know, rolled over into providing housing. And so we all agree that the citizens that were, you know, are vulnerable citizens among us, I mean, they deserve this independent housing. And I mentioned earlier, you know, that was working with Vail. I mean, that was a thing that I so appreciate about that organization. I mean, that's their focus. And to hear the testimonies and meet their clients that they work with that has achieved that, you know, that independent living. It's exciting to hear. So there's no question we need to do it, but, you know, we've got to overcome some of these barriers.
Thank you, Tony. Randall Wolf?
Yeah, thank you. You know, a lot of good points have come up from everyone. You know, we need to increase some of those benefits in some way or supplement them through the state. We need to make sure that everybody that needs this also understands how they can access it through the federal programs. One thing that comes to mind for me is bringing together some nonprofits in a public-private partnership sort of approach. So Habitat for Humanity is doing great work in Stanton, Waynesboro, Charlottesville, and other areas throughout the state, building affordable housing. If we work together and brought Habitat for Humanity together, ARC, the state, and got them thinking about how could they contribute to affordable housing that's dedicated to disabled people, that maybe there's a solution there that at least in some communities could help. Because trying to get private landowners that own lease or rent apartments or to build that affordable housing is really tough. But we need to work harder at, you know, encouraging different zoning and you know, get this done, but it's not an easy solution. But I think working together with a nonprofit like Habitat could be an area to look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Bell?
So say something obvious. This is a topic that terrifies the people who are primary caregivers. And there's two cliffs that we think about. The first is when you get out of school. Certainly the majority look forward to years of taking care of their kids, but there's another cliff. And it is the cliff at which you die. And you are no longer able to take care of your kids. And you all worry, hopefully decades from when they turn 18 or 21, but it's there. And the question of what's there available is terrifying. And so we have, you know, the waiver system has, I think, flexibility, because again, this is a place where you couldn't have a larger difference in what families and the consumers are looking for. I mean, you have some who can't feed themselves, who can't go to the bathroom, can't clothe themselves, are nonverbal. They need ongoing 24/7 oversight at least, and care, and however you want to divvy that up. And then you've got all the way, and the waivers allow for this, but you have ones who can live in a group home with a little bit of oversight. You've got ones that can live in an apartment so long as someone is there with them. You have some who just need someone to check in once a week, make sure the electric bill gets paid, make sure there's food in the fridge, make sure that the dishes get done, but otherwise can largely live independent lives. Now, there's other supports needed for jobs or what they do with their days, but at least they can live out in the community. And the waivers as constructed allow for all of that. And they really are allowed to do a real case by case based on what the caseworker can find. And certainly there are limitations in what the neighbor, what the community can provide. And so in an earlier ARC meeting, we talked about there are some opportunities in more urban areas than there might be in the country. But in any case, the waiver does allow for them to construct, at least from what's available. And I think that's ultimately what you're looking for, is the families would want to have some confidence that their loved one will be kept safe. Now, there's an interesting, in terms of choices, Delegate Runyon, Chris mentioned a place called Innisfree. And if you've never visited, I think it's worth a visit, because they were a group of parents who got together and said, this is a problem. We see this as a problem. Where are our kids going to stay when we're gone? And they helped found something called Innisfree Village. And the difference is they're volunteers. The volunteers actually live on premises. They get a minor stipend, but they're certainly not doing it for the pay. And they stay for a year, and then with the training, and they usually are between having a gap year or it's part of their education, they then go on and do other things. But what's interesting is we had to create a new category, because the categories we had for group homes didn't fit. And we created a category, and I'm not sure there's anybody except this one person in it, but certainly other places could have it. But the idea that giving parents and families some different choices and options about where their loved ones can stay and live. And if they're going to stay at home, that's fine, but maybe they need, again, some of the other supports we talked about, like respite care. But if they're going to be at a group home, maybe they don't need a big group home. Maybe they just need a couple of people. Maybe it could be someone. There's actually a program where they pay someone to live with the person with the special needs. It's still better and cheaper than a big institutionalized group home. And so lots of options, I think, are available, but it does come back to having these waivers available when someone needs it. This is another place where I would encourage ARC to sort of come up with what's the most important thing. Again, for my listening, I think it's those priority 1 waivers, but you guys might decide that's second or third, but that would be the one that would immediately address some of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Jennifer Kitchen.
Okay, so Virginia ranks 39th in providing services to folks with developmental disabilities. For the 9th richest state in the nation, that's unacceptable. And particularly as the pandemic has made the need for housing assistance greater than ever, due to the increase in health problems, the difficulty in accessing and using support services, our waiting list of folks who need services has just continued to grow. And unless we have more funding, we really are only capable of providing help once someone is already in crisis. We also need to make sure that housing options for members of the disability community are prioritized in all conversations around creating more affordable housing. So often conversations around issues of class go on without remembering to center the disability community. And this is because there are not enough members of the disability community in the areas where these high-level decisions are being made that have such a huge impact on how they're able to live their lives. It's just another example of how we need to involve people who live with disabilities in this decision-making and this problem-solving process. Instead of talking about them as others, we need to bring all of these folks to the table to help develop our solutions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Bill Helsley.
Thank you. I am very committed to funding the current levels and increasing that in the future. For me, housing is very important, and I recently represented someone that I had the fortune, they had a development disability not as severe as some, so they could live independently with someone checking on them and everything. But the glow on their face when they invited me to come to their apartment, to have me come in, the lawyer, I wanted to go meet them there because it made them feel like a human being with dignity. This is my house. Look at this. This is where I sleep. and it made them feel so good. So for me, housing is very, very important for this, for the community. It sort of reminds me about, I guess I'm showing my age, but Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, when he's talking and arguing with Potter about, is it too much to give somebody some dignity with a bedroom, a clean bathroom, a nice place to come home after work? And I think that's how we need to address this. Now, I understand that that situation will not work for everyone. And I think everyone here has made some very good comments on this between public-private partnerships. Maybe we ought to look at some more housing trusts. That tends to be the gift that keeps giving when you reinvest some of the income and so forth back into it. Maybe we need to look at some of the local zoning laws so that we can make it more affordable to build housing for more people. But at the end of the day, my heart is with those people and trying to find a way for them to live independently if they're capable of so doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah Jane, are there any questions in the chat that haven't been covered by the questions that the candidates have answered so far this evening?
No, there are currently no questions in the Q&A, but we could also give people a minute or two if we have time to put questions in if they would like.
Okay, sounds good. And I guess in wrapping up, we have, it's 7:53, 8 p.m. is our ending time. Can we, let's see, can we give everybody just a minute to leave everyone with a sound bite? And I will thank you now for being with us tonight and taking the time to learn about the developmental disability community, if you didn't already know, and those of you who have been providing service to the state through representing us at the General Assembly and in the Senate. Thank you for everything that you do for the developmental disability community. And okay, let's see. I'm just going to go across really quickly. Jennifer, you want to say any last words?
Sure. I just want to say a final thank you to you, Heather, for moderating, and to the ARC in general, not only for this forum, but all of the work that you do to provide services for people in our community. And if anyone, I guess, has any questions specifically for me and any of my answers, you can reach me through electjenniferkitchen.com. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
Very briefly, where there's a will, there's a way. And we have to look at ourselves as a society and say, do we have a will to address this and do something about it? Because if we really do have a will, we can address these problems. Thank you.
Rob, Bell?
Well, I echo what some people have said. I would thank the ARC for putting this on. I think these are important questions, good questions, and I'm hopeful that the people that were listening were able to get some information just about sort of why and how things can be done. So thank you.
Okay, Randall Wolf, sorry.
Thanks again to the ARC for hosting this and all the work you do for the disabled people. And I've learned a lot just in this conversation from everyone. I'm glad to see, in a sense, that overall this was bipartisan, that we have more in common in this group than maybe we might have thought coming in. And I look forward to working together to be an advocate in the State House to get more access, respect, dignity for the people we all care about.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, Heather, thanks so much again for this forum. It was a pleasure this evening. It's always been. Also for those opportunities to meet with you and staff to continue the conversation, even apart from here. And I will reiterate, it's been my pleasure over the years being in the General Assembly to be able to carry legislation. It hasn't been earth-shattering. I'll admit, but I can guarantee you that it's meant a lot to the citizens, to the parents, to our most vulnerable citizens. It has helped them in their lives, and it's, you know, it's very humbling. That's the best part about this job, and I'm honored to do it and look forward to continuing to work with you and others. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Runyon.
Thank you, and I'll echo that. I truly appreciate the ARC for doing this, but I truly appreciate the ARC for helping me to better understand what the circumstances are. And then that allows me to help the constituents of the 25th District to better understand. And because I think we all want to support our friends and neighbors, and we all want to do the right thing. You know, I think it's incumbent on a legislator to listen to learn and then collaborate to act. And I think that's the message that I'd like to offer to folks tonight, that is the perception that I have developed as we get to have a conversation here. And so thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to visiting with everyone.
Thank you. Sam Soker.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, ARC. This was awesome. I really appreciated getting to listen tonight and to share some of my ideas. I want to make sure that I'm a voice in the room, that if I was to go to Richmond, that I would represent everybody. That's right now we have that lacking in our local leadership, that it's like just maybe about representing people that look like you or sound like you. And that's not acceptable. We are representatives. And so we would have to represent everybody. And I believe that the money is there. We've talked a lot about the funds. There are billion-dollar corporations that are not paying taxes at the same rates that a small business or an individual is paying taxes. That's totally unacceptable. So the money is there. The money is there to help everyone and make sure that all citizens of the Commonwealth, like I said, and like you all have said, have dignity, have a standard of living, and that will benefit everyone. So yeah, please reach out to my campaign too. If you have any questions, I'd love to continue this conversation. Take care.
Thank you. Sarah?
I'm going to echo so many of my colleagues who said thank you so much to the ARC for bringing us together and allowing us to hear directly, hear some of our folks to hear from us. As an advocate by profession, and as one who advocated fiercely for many family members with challenges personally, I know how important the role is that ARC plays in making sure that folks are heard and seen, and that the representatives in Richmond know what the concerns of the community are. I'm grateful for so many of the candidates and legislators from being on the Zoom tonight, including Mr. Bell and all of them for the thoughtful answers. I think it's important for us to come together and be together in our solutions when we can be. I also think it's very critical for us as legislators and candidates to be legislators, to hear from and allow the disability community to hear directly from us, and so that we can take their concerns and voices to Richmond. I hope for the chance to meet and discuss these issues more, and would encourage folks to check out our website as well if you're interested in more of me or my campaign.
Thank you. And John Avoli?
On here. There we go. I echo what everyone else has said, and thanks to the ARC, and also I've said it many, many times on a professional basis and experience level that prevention, early, the better. And I think we can master and conquer some of these issues that we're dealing with, provided that happens. We cannot wait until people hit a wall and try to rescue them at that point. So I will continue to strive to work with ARC and also people in our community with disabilities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, the ARC of Virginia, the ARC of Harrisonburg and Rockingham, and the ARC of Augusta, thank you. And we will be posting the recorded video on Facebook, and we will provide all of your contact information along with that post. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Bye. Have a good night.